I'm about to tell you a story that took me 5 years to survive, and 2 years to be ready to share. You're looking at a woman who faked her own death, and watched her ex-boyfriend cry at her funeral. He left me for someone richer while I was pregnant. He didn't know I lost the baby alone. He didn't know I spent 5 years building a file that could destroy him. I didn't send that file to the police. I didn't need to, because he destroyed himself. And the way it happened, you won't believe it until you see it. Stay with me until the end, because the moment I finally understood what I had traded away, and what I had gained, is not where you think it is. Comes right at the end. Some choices don't ruin your life immediately. They wait. My name is Mia, and this is how I let a man bury me alive, while I was already planning my resurrection.
Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Before you go any further, I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Whether you're tuning in from the United States, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, South Africa, or anywhere else, it truly means a lot to know you're here. I always enjoy seeing just how far this community reaches, and your presence here makes these stories even more meaningful.
I met Derek when I was 23 years old, fresh out of college. $47,000 in student debt I had no immediate plan to repay. A studio apartment with a landlord who never answered his phone and a faucet that dripped so consistently I started measuring time by it. And a mother who called every Sunday to ask, very gently but very persistently, when I was going to get my life together. Derek was 29, already in finance, already wearing suits that cost more than my monthly rent, already talking about investment portfolios and compound interest and diversified assets like those were words any normal person was supposed to understand. He was not rich yet, not the way he would eventually become, but he had something I did not have at 23. He had momentum, and when you have nothing, momentum looks a great deal like safety. We met at a coffee shop. He was ahead of me in line. He was arguing with the barista about the temperature of his latte. I remember thinking, this man is going to be completely exhausting. And then he turned around, and when he saw me, his whole face changed. He apologized for his tone. He explained that he had not slept, that he was closing a deal, that the pressure was getting to him and he did not normally behave like that. And somehow, in that exact moment, I felt seen. Not because he was smooth, not because the words were particularly remarkable, but because he was vulnerable. And vulnerability, in a man who appears to have everything under control, is devastating to a woman who is quietly holding everything together alone. We fell in love the way people fall in love when they are both running from something. He was running from a childhood that had told him he would never be enough, a father who called him a disappointment, a mother who looked through him like glass. I was running from the fear that I would spend my entire life struggling, that I would end up bitter and exhausted and waiting for someone to come and change things, the way my mother had waited, the way her mother had waited before her. For 2 years we were happy, not perfect, just happy. We fought about money, about the future, about whether love was actually enough when the bills were due, and the plans were only plans and the present kept arriving before the future was ready. But at the end of every fight, he held me. And I believed that meant something. That staying was proof that as long as we were still in the same room, still talking, still trying, we were okay. I was wrong. The cracks started small enough to explain away. His phone face down at dinner. Late nights at the office that became early mornings. The way he stopped asking about my day. The way his eyes glazed over when I talked about the things that mattered to me. The way I began editing myself, cutting my sentences shorter, making my enthusiasm smaller, because I could sense that his attention was elsewhere and I was too proud to acknowledge what that meant. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself every relationship has seasons. I told myself this was temporary, but seasons do not feel like free fall. And I was falling. I just had not looked down yet. Her name was Vanessa. I met her at a charity gala Derek took me to. The kind of event where the champagne is genuine and the warmth is not. She was exactly what you would expect. Blonde, thin, wearing a dress that cost more than my car, carrying herself with the particular ease of someone who has never had to calculate whether she could afford something. And when she looked at Derek across the room, I saw something in his eyes I had not seen in months. Not love. Hunger. Not for her. For what she represented. Her father owned half the city. Her grandfather had been a senator. Her trust fund could purchase Derek's entire company 3 times over, and still have change remaining. And Derek was a man who had spent his entire life climbing. He was never going to stop climbing just because he had reached me. I watched the way he leaned in when she spoke. The way he laughed at her observations like they were the most incisive things he had ever heard. The way he stood differently in her presence, taller, sharper, more like the version of himself he was trying to become. And I watched the way she looked at him. Not with love. With calculation. Like he was an asset she was considering acquiring. I did not confront him that night. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was insecure. That I was projecting my fears onto something innocent. I was 25 years old. And I had already learned what women are taught from birth. That we are supposed to doubt ourselves before we doubt the men who are hurting us. We are taught to be understanding, patient, forgiving, to extend the benefit of the doubt to people who have not earned it, to make ourselves smaller so they can feel bigger, to question our instincts so they never have to question their behavior. I gave Derek 3 more weeks of the benefit of the doubt, 3 weeks of watching him drift, 3 weeks of notifications I was not supposed to see. 3 weeks of conversations that stopped when I entered the room. 3 weeks of telling myself I was crazy. And then I found the messages. I was not the kind of girlfriend who checked phones. I believed in privacy. I believed in trust. I believed that if you had to check, you had already lost something that could not be recovered by finding proof. But Derek left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to shower. And it buzzed. And buzzed. And buzzed again. And I looked. Hundreds of messages. Months of them. Some from before we had even started experiencing problems. Some from nights he had told me he was staying late at work. Some from mornings he had kissed me goodbye and said he loved me. Can't wait to see you tonight. I wish I was with you right now. She doesn't understand me the way you do. When are you finally going to leave her? I read every single one. Standing in that kitchen in the apartment we had chosen together. In the life I had built myself around him, I read every word. Some messages were mundane. Lunch plans. Complaints about traffic. Work gossip. The entirely ordinary texture of a parallel life. He had been living right next to mine. Some messages were intimate. Fears he had shared with her that he had never shared with me. Secrets he had confided in her that he had kept from me for years. An entire emotional life I had believed was mine to hold. Held by someone else entirely. And some messages were cruel. Not directly about me, but about the life we had built together. The apartment he described as suffocating. The future he was already planning around Vanessa. The way he described me to her, needy, insecure, holding him back from becoming what he was supposed to be. When Derek came out of the shower, I was still standing there. His phone in my hand. My face completely still. He looked at me. His face did not show guilt. It did not show shame. It showed annoyance. Like I had interrupted something important. Like I was the one in the wrong. What are you doing with my phone? Flat voice. Hard eyes. Not sorry. Not caught. Annoyed. I asked him if he loved her. He said no. I asked if he wanted to be with her. He did not answer. That silence was my answer. Here is the thing about being 25 and financially dependent and desperately in love with someone who has already decided to leave. You do not leave first. You cannot. Because leaving requires admitting that the years you spent were wasted. That the person you built your future around never intended to build a future with you. That the love you gave with your whole self was always just convenient. I begged him. I am not proud of this. I am not telling this story to make myself look good or noble or composed. I am telling it because it is true. And because someone listening right now in the dark, alone with their phone pressed close, needs to hear that begging does not work. It never works. It only makes you smaller. I asked him what I had done wrong. I asked him what she had that I did not. I asked if we could go to counseling. I asked if he still loved me. I asked what I could change. I asked what I could do differently. I asked everything except the only question that actually mattered, which was whether any of my answers would have made a difference at all. And he let me ask. He stood in our kitchen with his arms crossed and his face completely still, and he let me exhaust myself. He did not comfort me. He did not apologize. He did not even have the basic decency to look uncomfortable. He just waited for me to finish, for me to run out of words, for me to stop being inconvenient. When I finally stopped talking, when I had nothing left, he looked at me and said, "I think you should stay somewhere else tonight." Not we. Not both of us. You. Because he had already decided. The apartment was his. The life was his. I was just visiting a future that was never going to have my name on it. I left that night with a duffel bag and a heart that did not yet know how to be broken because it had not yet understood that it was. 2 weeks after I found the messages. 2 weeks of sleeping on my mother's couch. 2 weeks of crying in the shower at 6 a.m. so she would not hear me through the walls. I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of that bathtub for an hour staring at the test. My hands were shaking. Not because I did not want the baby. I wanted that baby more than I had wanted anything in my entire life. Because a baby meant family. A baby meant belonging. A baby meant Derek and I would always be connected, even if he chose Vanessa. Even if he never came back. Even if everything else had already ended. And some stupid, desperate, hope-soaked part of me believed a baby would bring him home. I know how that sounds. I know. But when the ground disappears beneath you and you are falling and you will grab onto anything that looks like it might hold your weight, you do not stop to assess whether it is solid first. You just grab. I called him that night. He did not answer. I texted. We need to talk. It's important. He replied 3 hours later. Busy. We'll call you tomorrow. He never called. So I went to his apartment. The apartment where I had made him dinner, held him when his days were bad, fallen asleep in his arms more times than I could count. He opened the door. He did not step back to let me in. He stood in the doorway like I was a stranger who had arrived at the wrong address. I told him I was pregnant. I watched his face, looking for anything. Joy, fear, panic, even guilt. What I found was annoyance. A baby. That was all he said. Not, "We will figure this out." Not, "I am here." Not even the bare minimum of acknowledgement that the situation required something from him. Just a baby. Like I had told him I had misplaced something of his that was now inconvenient to retrieve. I asked him what he wanted to do. He shrugged. He actually shrugged. "I don't know, Nia. What do you want me to say?" I told him I wanted him to be present. I told him I wanted us to be a family. I told him I still loved him. And he looked at me. And he said, "I think you should go." He closed the door. And I stood in that hallway holding the door frame like I could stop it from shutting. Like I could stop any of it. He stopped answering my calls. He stopped replying to my messages. His voicemail filled. Then his number disconnected entirely. I went to his apartment. The key I still had on my keychain no longer worked. The lock had been changed. I knocked. No answer. A neighbor opened their door and told me he had moved out the previous week. Did not leave a forwarding address. I went to his office. The receptionist looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has been briefed on exactly this kind of situation. "Mr. Davis transferred to our Chicago office." When? Last month. Last month. Before I found the messages. Before I told him about the baby. Before I stood in that hallway holding a door frame. He had been planning his exit while I was still planning our future. He had already left. He simply had not bothered to tell me. I found out through mutual contacts that he had moved in with Vanessa, that they were engaged, that her father had given him a position in the family company, corner office, expense account the future Derek had always been building toward. He did not just leave me. He upgraded. And I was the previous model, discarded at the side of the road while he kept driving without a single glance in the rearview mirror. I spent weeks in bed, barely eating, barely moving, barely breathing. My mother brought soup I did not touch. My friends called and I let them go to voicemail. The world kept turning with the absolute indifference it always has for personal catastrophe. And I stayed still. And then at 10 weeks, I lost the baby. The doctor said it was stress. That my body had reached its limit. That grief and shock and sustained trauma had created conditions that made continuing the pregnancy impossible. My body had finally put down what it could no longer carry. I sat in that hospital bed alone. No family. I had not told my mother the full story yet. No friends who knew where I was. No Derek. No one who knew that something had just ended that I had wanted desperately to begin. Just me. And the silence where a heartbeat had been. I do not remember much about the days immediately after. I remember staring at a ceiling. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing with the same indifferent hum it buzzes at for everyone. I remember a nurse named Margaret who held my hand when I started crying and did not ask what happened. She just stayed. Margaret. I never forgot her. One stranger's quiet presence in the darkness. That is sometimes all that holds a person together. I have never told anyone about Margaret until now. I remember thinking that if I just stopped fighting, if I just let go, maybe everything would stop hurting. And then one morning, the kind of morning that arrives without permission and announces nothing, something shifted. Not hope, not healing. Something harder, colder, more specific. Something that had been sleeping inside me my entire life, waiting for a reason to open its eyes. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the woman who had begged Derek to stay. That woman was gone. She had died in that hospital bed on a cold morning with no one to hold her hand except a stranger named Margaret. And someone else. Someone harder, smarter, and more patient than anything Derek had ever encountered. Opened her eyes. And started planning. I did not call him. I did not show up at his new home. I did not send messages he could screenshot and use against me. I did something far more effective. I started collecting. Derek was careful. But careful and smart are not the same thing. He had spent years building a life on a foundation of convenient lies. And I had spent years sitting beside him while he spoke about his business, late nights, loose talk, the overconfidence of a man who believes the person listening is not really paying attention. He thought I was just the girlfriend, the background, the woman who smiled and nodded and did not ask questions that might make him uncomfortable. But I remembered everything. Every late-night complaint about his boss. Every drunken confession about funds. He had moved through channels that would not withstand scrutiny. Every name, date, account, offshore shell company mentioned casually like it was nothing because he believed I was nothing. I started with paper. Bank statements he had left in our apartment. Emails forwarded to me by accident during the years he used me as a sounding board. Text messages sent when he was too comfortable to be careful. Then I got smarter. Old colleagues who still carried resentment from the way Derek had climbed over them. Former clients who had been shorted on deals they never fully understood had been dishonest. A forensic accountant who owed me a favor from years before. One by one I found them. One by one they talked. Piece by piece I built something Derek had no idea existed. A complete picture of every lie, every stolen deal, every name and number and transaction that his life of success had been built upon. But I did not use it. Not yet. Because I did not just want to destroy him. I wanted him to destroy himself first. And then I wanted a front row seat. The hardest part was convincing the world I was gone. I could not simply disappear. My mother would call the police. Friends would file reports. Questions would be asked that needed answers. So I gave them a story instead. A single car accident on a rainy highway late at night. A fire. A body burned beyond recognition. A closed casket. No one would see a face. No one would ask too many questions about someone with no close family present to push for answers. I had help. An old friend from college who had gone into a field where paperwork could be quietly arranged. Someone who owed me more than I had ever called in. Someone who understood what it meant to need a way out. Money I had saved from work he never knew about. Jobs I had taken quietly, income one had kept separate. A small reserve I had been building since the year I realized that depending entirely on someone else was a form of vulnerability I could not afford. The news ran a small story. Local woman dies in single car collision. No name at first. Just a woman in her 20s. Then my mother was contacted. And she identified what they told her was me. She would never forgive me if she knew. I know that. Harriet. But she raised me to survive. And sometimes survival demands more from you than you thought you had to give. No one questioned it for long. I was nobody in the world's eyes. The ex-girlfriend. The woman he had left behind. Nobody was searching for me with the kind of urgency that reveals inconsistencies. Derek sent flowers to my funeral. White lilies. My mother told me later. She said he cried. I did not believe it. Derek did not cry for me. He cried for the inconvenience of my story, because my death was a reminder of what he had chosen to do. And now he could never fully outrun it. Because now, every time he held Vanessa's hand, every time he accepted an award, every time he stood in the life he had bought with her father's money, he would wonder if I was watching. I was not watching yet. I was building. I moved to a different state, different time zone, different everything. New name, new hair, new way of speaking, new way of entering a room, new way of existing in a world that no longer had my old name anywhere in its records. I found work. Freelance consulting, nothing that required a full background check, nothing that required a history that could be traced too carefully. Just enough to stay off the grid. Just enough to survive while I built the thing that actually mattered. Every night I worked on the file. Every night I added more. More evidence. More names. More documented proof of every transaction, every lie, every moment Derek had treated the rules that governed everyone else as optional for him. I learned patience in a way I had never understood it before. Revenge, when it is real and not just something you say in the anger of the first week, is not a sprint. It is a marathon. Methodical. Slow. Driven not by emotion but by the calm certainty that what you are building will eventually become exactly what it needs to be. And Derek had absolutely no idea I was coming. I watched him from a distance. Social media. Industry publications. Business news. Every promotion. Every profile piece where he talked about his journey, his values, his supportive wife and his beautiful family, and his relentless self-made climb from nothing. From nothing. He had built nothing. He had taken, borrowed, manipulated, stepped on people who trusted him, erased anyone who got in the way, called it ambition. He never mentioned me. Of course he did not. I was the chapter he had quietly deleted. The paragraph that did not serve the narrative he was telling the world. The footnote that nobody would ever read. But I was still there. In the margins. In the shadows. In the spaces between every carefully constructed sentence he had ever spoken about who he was. Writing the final chapter. He just did not know it yet. Derek married Vanessa 6 months after my funeral. 6 months. I watched the wedding photographs from a blank account with no followers and no posts and no identity anyone would recognize. Just a pair of eyes in the dark, looking at a life I had been edited out of. He looked happy. She looked beautiful. Her father looked like a man welcoming a shrewd investment into the family. The church was full of people who had never met me, who did not know I had existed, who believed Derek was a self-made man when really he had found the most convenient host available, and attached himself accordingly. And I sat in my small apartment, in my city that was not my city, watching a screen, feeling nothing. Not sadness. Not jealousy. Not rage. Certainty. Because I knew something none of them knew. I knew that Derek's empire was built on sand. That Vanessa's father had no idea who he had welcomed into his bloodline. That the higher Derek climbed, the more structural pressure he was placing on a foundation that would not hold. So I waited. 3 years passed. 3 years of watching. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of adding to the file while Derek's name appeared in more and more publications under more and more glowing headlines. 40 under 40. Businessman of the Year. The man who built an empire from nothing. Nothing. He had built nothing. He had assembled a structure using other people's trust as the primary building material. And trust, when it is removed, takes the entire structure down with it. And then year 4. A government investigation. Not triggered by me. By someone else who had noticed the cracks. Someone who had enough standing to ask the questions that turned into formal inquiries. A small article first. Local firm under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet. Just hints. Whispers. The beginning of something that could not be stopped once it started. Then the whispers became headlines. Then the headlines became investigations. Then the investigations went federal. Derek panicked. He called partners who no longer answered. He shredded documents that had already been copied. He begged Vanessa's father for help. And I watched. Because I had been patient enough to see it. Derek had spent his whole life stepping on people to climb higher. And now every single one of those people was stepping back. The investigation became public. Partners abandoned him in the order they had privately decided before the news even broke, each one already having moved to protect themselves before the story ran. Investors pulled out. His board asked for his resignation in language that made it clear it was not a request. His name moved from the business section to the front page. And Vanessa's father, the man who had opened the door and handed Derek a future, threw him to the press without a single private conversation first. And Derek, for the first time in his adult life, was completely alone. No money, no power, no investors, no board, no allies, no reputation, no one to call, no one to save him. Just the consequences of every choice he had made, every person he had stepped on, every relationship he had treated as a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be treated with dignity. I watched him lose everything. His company, his reputation, his marriage. Vanessa filed for divorce within 4 months. She took the children. She took the house her father had paid for. She took every material thing and left Derek with exactly what he had left me with. Nothing. I went to find him on the anniversary of my fake death. 5 years. 5 years of watching, waiting, building, surviving, becoming someone he would not recognize until it was too late to matter. He was living in a small apartment. The kind of apartment I had lived in when he met me. The kind of apartment he had promised in the early months that he would make sure I never had to live in again. He opened the door. And for a long moment, a long, beautiful, irreversible moment, he just looked at me. He did not recognize me at first. My hair was different. My clothes were different. Everything about the way I occupied space was different. Because I was different. The woman who had stood in his hallway holding a door frame was gone. The woman in the doorway now had never begged for anything. And then his eyes widened. And I watched the exact moment his brain connected everything at once. Nia. His voice cracked on the single syllable of my name. Hello, Derek. He stumbled back. His hands were shaking. His face had lost all its color. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead. I know. I went to your funeral. I know. I cried at your funeral. I know. He looked at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. Not the ghost of the woman he had loved. The ghost of the woman he had decided was disposable. The woman who had begged him to stay. The woman who had lost his baby. The woman he had walked away from without a conversation. That woman was gone. I was someone else entirely. He asked why I was there. I told him I was not there for revenge. I was not there to gloat. I was not there to watch him suffer in real time or to deliver a speech I had rehearsed. I was there to close a door. I spent 5 years building a file that could have destroyed you, I said. Records of every crime, every lie, every name and account and transaction and cover-up. Evidence that would have sent you to prison for longer than you want to think about. But I did not have to use it. Because you destroyed yourself. I just made sure I had a front row seat. He started crying. Real tears this time. I was almost certain of it. Not for me. For himself. For the money and the title and the family and the reputation, all of it gone. For the empire that had lasted exactly as long as empires built on dishonesty always do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Over and over. Like a prayer. Like a confession. Like words that could reach backward through 5 years and change the shape of what had happened. I looked at him. And I felt nothing. Not forgiveness. Not pity. Not the satisfaction I had sometimes imagined feeling in this exact moment. Just nothing. Sorry does not bring back my baby. His entire body flinched. Sorry does not return the years I spent learning how to exist in a world that was supposed to include a child who never got to arrive. Sorry does not give back what grief costs the people who have to do it alone. What do you want me to say? He whispered. Nothing. I do not want anything from you. I never did. I only wanted you to know one thing. I survived. And I did not need you to do it. I walked out of his apartment and I did not look back. Not because I was being dramatic. Not for effect. Because there was nothing behind me that I needed to carry forward. Derek was already gone from my story. He had been gone for years. I had just arrived to make it official. He would spend the rest of his life wondering if I was real, wondering if I would come back, wondering if I would eventually send the file, wondering if every unfamiliar face he passed on the street was me. I never sent it. I never needed to, because the best revenge was never prison. The best revenge was knowing that he would never feel completely safe again, that every night he went to sleep, somewhere in the world, the woman he had decided was nothing was living a better life than anything he would ever build from the ruins of what he destroyed. Some choices do not ruin your life immediately. They wait. And so did I. But not for him. For myself. Because I am finally free. There is one thing I understand now that I did not understand when I was 23. Not every choice feels wrong when you make it. Some feel necessary. Some feel responsible. Some feel like the only option that makes any sense when you are standing in the middle of your life without a clear view of the edges. I did what I did because I was trying to survive. Because I was alone. Because I was 25 and grief-stricken, and I had decided that disappearing was better than continuing to disappear piece by piece in a world that did not notice I was going. I know better now. I know that the version of you that exists before the choice that changes everything, that version with all her pain and hope and terrible clarity and impossible love, is worth protecting. Even when the world is asking you to trade her. Especially then. If you are listening to this right now, and you are standing at a door, wondering if you have what it takes to walk through it, wondering if you will ever feel like yourself again after what has been done to you, you will. Not because it is easy, because you are still here. And being here is always enough to begin. He thought he buried me. He buried the wrong woman. The woman who survived. She is not forgiving anyone. She is just done. Do not wait for an apology that will never come. Build your own door. And walk through it alone if you have to. Thank you for staying with me to the end.